We're gonna start. I'm gonna start at 2:03. Give folks a minute or two to get on, but to get us moving. Just hang out for a little while.
And I just started recording too, just as a FYI.
Welcome, Kelsey. I hear it's your first day on the job.
Yes, hi, thanks.
That is inevitable that my dogs will start barking at some point during this call, so I apologize in advance. We'll get started in just a couple minutes here. So thanks everyone for joining us today. We've got a lot of people joining the Zoom, so we'll just give them a couple minutes to get on, and then we'll get started.
Meeting is being recorded.
Yes, we can.
Okay, my microphone did something weird, I'm sorry. So want to get more information, I can give you details on how to go to the page, to set up your Give page, how to set up
If
the goal,
folks could mute their phones, that would be great.
and how to.
Thank you.
There we go.
I said it'll start at 2:03. Give people 2 minutes grace period, but then we will get started here in just another minute or so. We had over 40 people register, so we're expecting a good sized crowd, which is great. Right, if we have folks mute their phones, that would be appreciated. All right, it is 2:03. So I said we'd start at 2:03, so let's get started. I'm sure we'll have a few more folks joining us, but thank you to everyone for joining. This is the bidders conference for Thurston County's Consolidated Request for Proposal process. This is kind of our annual process, but we do this, we have a big RFP every other year, and this is a substantial year for us. I think one of our largest years in terms of the amount of funding that is available. So thank you all for joining. For those who don't know, my name is Tom Webster. I'm the program manager for Thurston County Public Health and Social Services Office of Housing and Homeless Prevention. And so most of the funds in this RFP are under the Office of Housing and Homeless Prevention, but we also have our treatment sales tax program and also Veterans Assistance Fund also represented here. So we will introduce those folks as we kind of move through the process. Couple logistics as we get going. If you could keep yourself muted during the call, that would be appreciated. We will go through the different RFPs and kind of do a presentation, talk through the various proposals they're putting out, and then we'll save a lot of time at the end for questions and answers. So we'll cover all the Q&A at the end. So let us get through all the different pots of money and priorities. We'll do a little Zoom grants overview for folks, but then we'll do questions at the end. If you do have questions, you can put them in the chat. Nicole Boys is going to be monitoring that. We'll may answer some of those if they're easy to answer, but we'll save most of those for the end. We are also recording this webinar, so we will repost the recording of this on the website following. So if you have staff who want to go back and listen, or if you want to go back and review anything, this will be posted to our website at the end. So and also for those who cannot attend, they're able to review this. So I'm going to share my screen to start, just to share the agenda with everyone. So we're going to just talk a little bit of overview, some general information, key dates and deadlines. Then we'll go through, we have 5 RFP documents. The Human Services Fund, you may know this as Health and Human Services Council, or the CIP, is what it was previously known as. Our Affordable Housing and Homeless Services RFP, the Community Development Block Grant, which is focused on the city of Tumwater this year, treatment sales tax, and the Veterans Assistance Fund. And we'll do a quick Zoom grants overview and questions and answers. So before we get started, I'm going to stop sharing just for a minute. Can I see a raise of hands for folks who have not submitted an application under this process before? I don't know if you can, maybe in your reactions, put up a thumbs up or a clap somewhere. Who's brand new to this process for us? So hard for me to see everybody on the screens here, but definitely see some thumbs up and some hands. All right, thank you. So we will go through the Zoom grants application process. We've been using it for 4 or 5 years now, and it seems to work pretty well. And it should be pretty intuitive. So before I get started, I see we have Councilmember Jim Cooper from Olympia here, who's the chair of the RHC, and I just want to welcome him and see if he wants to say any words to the group. No, he's shaking his head. So this RFP for the first time is being issued under the Regional Housing Council. We're excited that that body is now up and running and official. And so decisions for the housing piece of the pie will be made kind of within the Regional Housing Council. All right, so I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. And so first key dates is the RFP opened on Friday, so the RFP is available for folks, and we see that last I checked, about 11 applications have been started. So for those who have started an application, that's great. Applications are due on April 2nd, Friday, April 2nd at 12 noon. That is when the application portal will close, and any application submitted after that point will not be accepted. So we're looking for an April 2nd due date. The review process happens, especially I'm speaking for the Housing Homeless Human Services Fund in April, with decisions for the funds in May. When we get to the treatment sales tax, I'll let Carrie Hennon talk a little bit about the timing and process for the TST funds. You've got, was that about 5 weeks or so to work on your applications. And so that's the key deadline that we need to be working for. So I'm going to jump right in and talk about the Human Services Fund RFP. This is, okay, thanks for bearing with me. Human Services Fund. So our first RFP is the Human Services Fund. As I said, this was previously known as HHSC, or the CIB Community Investment Partnership. So this is funding that is local funds. Jurisdictions contribute 0.5% of their sales tax to this fund. And so what the REC is looking for this year is the same type of priorities that they funded the past 3 years around basic needs activities. So there's around $272,000 available for what is they're calling basic human needs. So this includes food and meal programs, childcare, personal hygiene, and other emergency needs broadly defined. One-time emergency assistance that are not covered under another eligible category. That can include things like car repair assistance, clothing, cold weather survival gear that's needed hopefully to prevent someone from being homeless, or that just kind of helps get them over a tough situation. So that is the Human Services Fund. I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. And we'll answer questions at the end, as I said. So I think this is pretty straightforward. This is the same as it's been the last couple of years, as I said, no change in priorities. The next RFP that I want to highlight is our Affordable Housing and Homeless Services RFP. This is our biggest pot of money, probably around, what do we say, $6.9 million estimated. We don't have a final state budget yet. We actually just got our federal budget for home and Cdbg dollars, and these amounts are pretty close to what we did receive. So a fairly substantial amount under this pocket of money. So a couple things I wanted to point out that are a little bit different this year in this RFP. I'm looking at page 13 of the RFP, where we list the priorities for this year. So we've broken it down into our uncommitted funding priorities, and these are priorities set by the Regional Housing Council based on input from the Thurston Thrives Housing Action Team. So for those of you who participate on the Housing Action Team, hopefully this will look familiar to you. So that overall priority is looking at projects that proactively and directly work to reduce the number of persons experiencing homelessness, and that work to reduce and eliminate racial disparities within the homeless crisis response system, as identified in the 5-year homeless crisis response plan. So really looking to tie projects to that 5-year plan and looking to emphasize reducing and eliminating racial disparities. We've also highlighted that we want to make sure that we're maintaining a balance of funding between different populations, including single adults, youth, families, seniors, and veterans. And then we've called out 4 broad categories of activities around emergency shelter, operations for permanent supportive housing, outreach, and rapid rehousing. Those are not listed in a priority order. So those are all of equal priority within this RFP. So that's fairly similar to the past couple of years, but with a little more emphasis on the racial disparities, moving it up to the high priority here, and then calling out some of these types of activities. We then have a series of committed funding priorities. These are activities that the RHC knows that it wants to fund. And so we're looking for proposals that specifically address these priorities. The first one is around our coordinated entry system. So we have a coordinated entry system. So we're looking for one lead agency who will be responsible for implementing our coordinated entry. Next, housing basic needs. So where we talked about the HSF looking at basic needs in general, certainly housing is a basic need, but we pulled out housing from that pot of money because we want to address it separately. And so looking for these housing basic needs, this is something that also has been funded in the past several years. And this priority maintains and is similar to that same language that you've seen in the past. So this is for things like rent assistance, utility assistance, emergency home repair, and fees and deposits to secure housing. Next, we have priorities around cold and hazardous weather. Once again, these are things we've funded in the past. We're looking to continue to fund to support a cold weather shelter system in the winter, and also hazardous weather, which can be year round, whether that's a recent snowstorm or during smoke season or any other hazardous weather event during year round. We want to make sure we have capacity during those times. And then two new priorities that have been added this year. One is around senior housing. The REC has identified that they want to make sure that some of our funding is specifically supporting and targeting senior citizens to assist participants obtain or maintain affordable housing. So we're looking for applications specifically targeted towards seniors. And this is projects supporting low-income seniors at or below 30% of area median income, or who are at risk of becoming homeless. And then the final category for committed funds are by and for organizations. So this is coming from the Department of Commerce under the Consolidated Homeless Grant. So we receive a portion of funding from the Washington State Department of Commerce. And within those guidelines, they have identified that, and these are draft guidelines, so they're not final yet, but we're looking to adhere to them, knowing that they may be modified in the coming months, that we contract at least 5% of our annual local and state awarded document recording fee funds, so that's our 2163 and Consolidated Homeless Grant, CHG funds, to by and for service providers for outreach to communities on how to access the homeless crisis response system. So for those of you, for the by and for organization definition is new. We've included that here in the RFP. It's also directly in the application. These are organizations whose primary mission and history is serving a specific community, and they are culturally based, directed, and substantially controlled by individuals from the population they serve. And these communities can include ethnic and racial minorities, immigrants and refugees, individuals who identify as LGBTQ+, individuals with disabilities, or who are deaf and Native Americans. So that's a new category for us. So we are looking and encouraging, if you are a by and for organization, we strongly encourage you to apply because we're looking to direct a portion of our funds to those organizations specifically for outreach activities. So that is an overview of the homeless services component of this RFP, but I'm going to turn it over now to Jacinda Stelchis, who's going to talk about the capital improvements portion of the RFP. So our capital dollars are also included in here. So Jacinda, can you introduce yourself and talk about the capital improvement priorities?
Yes, and I may need you to scroll through, Tom.
Yep.
So my name is Jacinda Stelchis. I'm with Thurston County Office of Housing and Homeless Prevention. One of the RFPs is for capital improvement projects. So those are funded through home and 2060 funds. And the sorry, I'm wondering if it might be better to pull up on my screen separately too, but these are the priorities for funding. Again, this is separate than the RFI. So this is projects that would happen in the funding pipeline for 2021. Don't know how detailed we want to get in going through these, but we're looking for projects that are targeting 60% or below of area median income. Projects that are promoting growth of personal and family wealth, such as home ownership programs. Again, as we saw in the other RFPs, trying to be cognizant of not just focusing funds on one population. So again, seniors, youth and young adults, families, single adults and veterans, trying to get looking at projects that are going to fill our pipeline that for this 2021 year that are not just focused on one population. And then again, these are home and 2060 funds that will be funding this RFP. So looking at new unit creation and preservation. Also sometimes referred to as rehabilitation. So units that are including permanent supportive housing, multifamily rental, home ownership, for literally homeless individuals and literally homeless families. So I will also mention this RFP is where we would be looking for CHODO applicants, community housing development organizations. And I don't want to get too far into it, but if you are thinking that your organization may fit that criteria, feel free to reach out and I can help kind of help you distinguish if that is the case. But those applications would come in through this RFP, as well as any applications that are already in our capital pipeline that were established or placed in the pipeline a few years ago for the year 2021. We'd be looking for an application from you to ensure that the project is moving forward as planned. And then we do have a project that wasn't able to move forward as planned. So there is a gap in the pipeline, or I guess I should say a slot in the 2021 pipeline that this RFP process would be where you all would be looking to apply to fill that spot in the pipeline. I don't know if there's any other really large changes. Oh, and I'm sorry, Dan had mentioned in the chat, and I will just say aloud too. Anyone that does have questions about the capital improvements RFP or CHODO, as well as the separate RFI that we'll get to later, I would be the contact for that. For those, sorry.
All right, thanks, Jacinda. And we'll come back and touch on the RFI. I know that can be a little confusing. We'll touch on that in a little bit for those folks who are interested in the RFI. All right, now, so that's the Affordable Housing and Homeless Services RFP at a high level. And so moving on to the Community Development Block Grant Program. So I know Jacinda is working with John Doan from the City of Tumwater. So John, do you want to kick things off and talk about what the City of Tumwater is looking to do with their Cdbg funding this year?
Sure, great. Thank you, Tom, and thank you everybody for being here and showing so much interest. I'm just going to briefly go through, I think it's page 5 and 6 of the RFP, which lays out for the capital projects really a priority for Tumwater around affordable housing. And we've given some great examples there of affordable housing options, from the creation of new housing to preserving affordable housing stock within our community, or helping out with new projects as they can, or some combination of all of those. I think the council's focus is really trying to focus on one or two large projects and making something happen. And as everybody knows, we're limited to at least 85% of the funds available, which we estimate to be about $1 million. We actually don't know the exact number till the federal budget gets adopted, but to be about $1 million. So at least 85% of that has to go towards projects. And then the council said that up to 15% could go towards public services, and they set some priorities there. The first one being to organizations, providers that are located in Tumwater and serving Tumwater residents. The second priority is organizations which are not physically located in Tumwater, but are serving Tumwater residents, and gave a few examples, a pretty broad list of the types of public services that would be allowed. We took off the list public facility projects and economic development projects, just to try to keep people focused on either things that related to housing or sort of essential needs. So Jacinda, is there anything else you want to add to that?
I think the only thing I will add is just a reminder to everyone that again, the Cdbg funds are focused in Tumwater this year, and that one of the requirements of Cdbg is an income 80%. Excuse me, I'm sorry, guys. 80% or less area median income. So if you are new to Cdbg, make sure that you check out the income table. And you know, it's just a good first step to make sure your program is going to be serving people that are 80% or below of area median income.
Yeah, thank you, Jacinda. Only other thing I would add is I think in the schedule it outlines some dates for potential presentations to the City Council. I would say on the capital project side, anticipate making a presentation to the council. On the service side, we'll probably just wait and see how many applications there are and make a decision after that as to whether or not there are presentations.
Great, thanks for that. The only other thing I would add is, especially for those capital projects, you are required to go through a NEPA, an environmental review process. So please don't acquire any property or start your project before you hear about the Cdbg funds, because if you do have federal funds, you don't want to take what are called choice limiting activities that limit the ability of the Cdbg funds to be used if you start moving forward with your project before that environmental review is completed. So if you have questions about that, please reach out to Jacinda. All right, well, I'm going to keep us moving along here and move on to the treatment sales tax RFP. So Carrie Hennon is our TST leader. So Carrie, why don't you talk about treatment sales tax?
All right, thanks. Hi, everybody. Carrie Hennon, Public Health and Social Services. So treatment sales tax, TST, these are local dollars. This is a portion of our sales tax. So therefore, I have a much shorter, more streamlined RFP because I don't have nearly as many rules as the people with the federal funds. So TST funds it's a restricted fund for mental health and substance use disorder treatment and related services. Most of our TST funds are already encumbered through the county budget process for programs largely operated by the county, but this is our opportunity to hear about great, new, exciting, innovative local programming that community agencies would be interested in launching. So there's a total of $250,000. So a lot less than the housing dollars, but still hopefully we'll be able to fund some great programming. Let's see, we have not identified any priority populations or specific kind of focus areas this year. So this is wide open to anything that is TST eligible. So again, making that clear connection to behavioral health treatment or services that support treatment. Minimum proposals, $30,000, maximum proposal, $100,000. We'll be making 2-year awards with 1-year contracts, so kind of renewable contracts. That's a little different than how we did it in the past. So same due date of April 2nd, and then similar to what Tom said for the housing dollars, the review process will take place in April. Decisions will be made in May and contract start date of July 1st. So in this case, decisions will be, well, the proposals will be reviewed by a team that includes some of our treatment sales tax advisory committee members, as well as some subject matter experts who will make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. So the county commissioners are the final decision makers for this particular fund source. And we look forward to hearing people's great ideas, emphasis on evidence-based practices. So if you can make kind of a clear connection to the specific evidence-based or promising practices that you will use in your program, that's really helpful. And yeah, look forward to any questions people have at the end, but should be a good process. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Carrie. And then our final RFP is the Veterans Assistance Fund. We don't have anyone, I don't believe we have anyone from the Veterans Program on. So this is $75,000 to fund Veterans Emergency Shelter Bed Programs. This is the same amount of funding, the same process that they have awarded the last several years. So there's usually 1 or 2 awards with these funds to help pay for shelter beds. So if you do have questions about this program, please reach out to Mark Moffitt, or you can reach out to me and I can put you in connection with Mark to get those questions answered. If you have specific questions about the Veterans Emergency Shelter Bed Program, but there's been no changes from the past couple of years. So that is a very quick run, 100-yard dash through 5 RFPs with a lot of money and a lot of details behind them. So what I'm going to do just to keep us moving forward, because I want to save a lot of time for your questions at the end. That's really the primary purpose of this, is to make sure we're able to get to your questions. So what I'm also going to show you here, let me go to how do you get and start an application. So let's start there. So sorry, you're all seeing my email. First thing you're going to do is you're going to go to that email that Nicole Boyce sent out, or perhaps you got it from Carrie, with a link to the RFP. So you can click on this on our website, or you can find it on the Public Health and Social Services website. But I'm going to click here and it takes us to our funding announcement page. And this is where, so all 5 of those RFPs that we just talked about, you can click on a link and download them here. So encourage you, for the funds you are reading, funds you are applying for, please look at those requests for proposals. They have the program rules, requirements, what's eligible organizations. So lots of details in those RFPs that will be important for your application. So I encourage you to download those there. Next, applications are completed through Zoom Grants. This is an online portal. So you're going to click on this link to go to Zoom Grants, and we'll go there in just a minute. Many of you, not all of you, have applied through Zoom Grants before, but that was probably maybe a year ago or maybe 2 years ago. And maybe the person who set up the account has left your organization, or maybe you forgot your username and password. If you have an existing Zoom Grants account but you need some assistance on how to recover that or what to do, Zoom Grants has put out this document around password guidance. So depending on what the situation is, if the person has left and you're not sure what to do now, look through this document for some guidance. If necessary, you can reach out to Zoom Grants directly for assistance in setting passwords. We at the county do not control that. So we are not going to be able to help tell you what your username was or your password was. We don't have any access to that information. You'll need to reach out to Zoom Grants, but please start off by reviewing this guide that will provide some tips and tricks and suggestions for how to transfer accounts between a new user if you have changes in staff. So please look at that if you need help getting back to your Zoom Grants account. So, I have too many tabs open. I've got to go back. When I click back to this page, I think I X'd out of it. So that password guidance is there. The bidders conference, which is going on here, and then questions. So you always email Nicole or myself if you have questions during the RFP process. If you're stuck, especially if you have questions on Zoom Grants, technical assistance, please let us know and we will do our best to help you. The other piece is we have a request for information out. This is for capital projects we are looking to fund in the year 2024. So we look 3 years out. So there's a capital project RFI. An RFI is not submitted through Zoom Grants. It is a separate application process. We don't use Zoom Grants. It's more high level. Those applications are also due at noon on April 2nd. And you're going to email those directly to Jacinda, and her email address is here. So you can download that capital project RFI, and then the application that you're going to fill out is embedded within this. So here you're going to provide your project details in here and submit. This is what we're looking for you to submit, these project details in this RFI. Jacinda, do you have anything else to say about the RFI process? The priorities are very similar to what is in the current RFP, but they're listed here also in the RFI document.
Can everyone hear me better, or is my sound still difficult?
That sounds better.
Okay, sorry, I'm not sure what happened there. Nothing super substantial, just we'll let people know that it is separate than the RFP. So I will be sending out a confirmation email that I received your RFI application. So just be on the lookout for that. If you don't see a confirmation email, please feel free to bug me. So we make sure that your application was received and we are aware of it.
All right, thanks for that. Okay, now let's get into Zoom Grants. So you're going to come to this page and you're going to click on this link to Zoom Grants. This is where you're going to start your application process. So you're going to come to this page. We've got open programs for the 2021 Consolidated Grant Application. If you are a new agency, if you've never had Zoom Grants before, you're going to create an account. So you're going to put in an email, a password, your first and last name, and you're going to create a new account here. You can set that up. One of the things we recommend is think about who is going to create the account and what email address you want to use. The person who creates the account, the email address, that is the login, that is the person who will need to submit your application. So think strategically about who you want to set up the account for your organization. You can use if you have an organizational email you want to use that will be around year after year, depending if you have staff changes, that may be a good idea. But we encourage you to think about who sets up that account, because that is the person who will need to submit your application. If you already have a Zoom Grants account, you can log in up here. So I'm going to kind of log into Zoom Grants. And it will kind of open this up. I've already started a test application under this, so it says apply again. There'll also be an apply, or it should just say apply. And here's my application that I started. But let's apply again. So you're going to click, I want to apply for this. I do want to start another application. All right. First thing to know, within Zoom Grants, there's this help button. So if you have Zoom Grant specific questions, you can click on this help, and there's some resources here within Zoom Grants, tips on using Zoom Grants that you can look through if those are helpful if you get stuck. That's going to be more on kind of the use of Zoom Grants. Zoom Grants uses these tabs, and so you're going to navigate through the document by using these tabs. And so the first is we have some just broad information about the RFP process. So an overview of the application process. And then if you want to close that information, you hit the hide this tab. Program eligibility, some information about each RFP, and then submission information. Once again, reminding you that submissions are due the 2nd. One change this year for everyone. In the past years, we've required you to submit a hard copy application. This year, you are not required to submit. We're not asking for a hard copy application. So no need to do a wet signature and mail us or drop off a hard copy of your application. Only through Zoom Grants is all that is needed this year. The tab that I think is most important up here is the library tab. So I encourage you all to kind of go into our library. This is where we have a lot of supporting documents. Once again, we have the RFPs listed here. So you can download those RFPs or the first couple here. We have a Zoom Grants Quick Start Guide, which if you're in Zoom Grants, probably won't need, but just in case. The document I think is most useful and I strongly encourage everyone to look at are these Consolidated Rfp Instructions. So what we've done in these instructions is try to provide a little more context and guidance around what reviewers are looking for in the application and under each question. So just opening this up quickly. Let's see. All right. So I think it's just I'm having a hard time with my share.
I think it sends it to a download.
Yeah,
then you
I
have
just
to-
can't.
And
There
it
it
won't go,
is.
okay.
All right, so we've got, you can see for questions like the buy and fork, what type of organization you are, we have a little more information about kind of documentation. What's a private nonprofit, a CHODO. So just a little more instruction, a little guidance, context for the questions that you will see. So strongly encourage you to review those, especially if you look at a question and it's not clear what you think we're looking for. All right. We also have some FAQs. These tends to be more Zoom Grant specific. The other one in here that I want to point out is the scoring criteria sheet. This is the scoring criteria for those housing related RFPs. The scoring criteria for TST is built into their RFP, so you can look at those there. The scoring criteria, which I've actually got open already. This will be important, and you'll see in a second. In the questions, we embed and try to provide guidance on what question links to what criteria. So if you see this question supports criteria number 2, then we're talking this here, project design is what it supports. So these are the scoring criteria review teams will use to score applications. And then based on which funding source, whether it's an HSF, Housing and Homeless Services, or the capital projects, what are the different criteria and scores. So that's an important document that you'll want to link. But one of the things we did this year was try to more clearly tie the questions to which criteria they support. So I encourage you to look at those, and then some other documents here as well. So let me hide that. All right. Your first page is just kind of a summary page. You're going to put in the name of your program or project, the amount you're requesting. All the awards will be 1-year awards. For the homeless services, almost all except for the cold and hazardous weather are based on our 2-year contract, the 1-year contracts, 1-year awards with the intent to provide a 2nd year of funding at the same funding level as we have done in past years. So it's 1 year of funding guaranteed, a 1-year contract with a renewal for a 2nd year if funding remains available. You're putting in your applicant information, your organizational information, a DUNS number. This allows, we also have the system checks kind of your IRS record, and a primary agency contact person, all of that. The other thing you can do in Zoom Grants is if you want to have other folks have access to your application within your organization or outside of your organization, you can add their email, name and email addresses here, and they will invite them to contribute and collaborate on your application. So they can go in and edit, if you give them editing access, or you can just give them read-only access. However, once again, only the person who created the application can submit it. So these folks, if you add them here, will be able to work on your application, but they will not be able to submit the application. After you complete that tab, you can either click on the next button, or you can go up to the next tab here. So here are your 4 tabs for your application: the summary tab, the application questions, the budget tab, and the documents tab. I'm not going to go through all of these questions, but the first one is going to be the most important, is going to determine what questions you answer. So you're going to indicate whether you're applying for a capital improvement project, a basic needs contract, housing basic needs, other homeless services, the Veterans Emergency Shelter Bed, Cdbg housing, Cdbg public service, or treatment sales tax. Based on your answer, well, my mouse is going a little bonkers. So based on your answer to this, if I click housing basic needs, then only the questions you need to answer will appear, and you'll scroll down. Some of them are checkboxes. Some of them are short response where you have 255 characters to answer the question. And then some are longer. And so you have, depending on how much we give you, half a page or a page and a half or so to respond. This box down here will tell you how many characters you have left. So this is a 4,000 character answer. You can cut and paste information into this box. It will only show those first 4,000 characters though. So if your answer is 5,000 characters long, it will cut off those last 1,000 characters. It will give you a warning to indicate that it is doing so, but that's a good test to do that. There's also limited formatting ability within these text boxes. So things like bold and underline are generally cannot be done in this. Zoom Grants is going to strip your application of all that formatting. You can do bullets, I think, is about as sophisticated as it gets from a formatting perspective. You will go through and answer these questions for your application, and then click on next to go to the budget tab. So under the budget tab, there are 2 budget tables here. The first one is for services and non-capital programs. So anything that is not a capital project. So the Human Services Fund, the Homeless Services, Cdbg Public Service, Treatment Sales Tax, Veterans, you're going to fill out this budget table. You can, if you have some other categories, if these categories don't work for you, go ahead and put in some custom categories. And we're looking at what are your requests? What are you funding out of this grant request? What other resources of your own agency resources are you bringing to the project? And then do you have other committed outside funding that's kind of secured, perhaps from a foundation or another source? And then what else is uncommitted outside funding? We have an application in with a foundation or another organization. We're hoping to support this program. For capital projects, you're going to fill out this. The categories are a little different, and then we're looking at kind of what your grant request is, your resources, and then what other federal, state, and private or other funds you're bringing into the project. And then at the bottom of the tab, there's a narrative where we're asking you to provide that narrative context for how you developed the costs for your budget and any sources you use. So everyone will fill out this narrative, budget narrative tab. And then the final tab is Documents tab, where you can attach additional documents to your application. So there's two things that everyone is required to attach in order to submit your application. The first is this verification and signature form. So you're going to click here to download this template, and that's where we need the signature of your executive, just certifying that you're you agree with the conditions in the RFP and you're authorized to submit this application on behalf of your agency. So that's required. We're also looking for your, if you're a nonprofit, your IRS letter of determination, your tax exempt status, your most recent 990, or if you're a for-profit, what's your articles of incorporation. So some documentation on your agency. Those are the two that you must attach in order to submit your application. There are other things here that you may be required to submit based on the type of application you're submitting. For example, for capital projects, or kind of those that are looking for federal funds, the Cdbg and home dollars, we have this acknowledgement of required assurances. The list of 50 federal regulations that you're required to comply with to receive these funds. We want you to download that and attach that. We're looking for a timeline for your project. So we're asking you to kind of attach a project timeline, as well as resumes for key staff. So depending on the type of application you're applying for, there may be other documents you need to attach. So please look at that. The last one down here, I'll also add for program policies and procedures. In certain cases, we're asking you to attach your program policies and procedures. So that's done under this last bullet. Once you have that all filled out, you're going to go, you can always print your application and preview it, see what it looks like, review it. When you're ready to submit, you're going to hit this Submit Now button. If I hit the Submit Now button, what you're going to see is I have a lot of red errors coming up. So it will tell me all the required fields that need to be filled in before I can submit an application. So look at that. If you have any of those fields, it will tell you what needs to be answered. Go back and submit that. If hopefully when you submit, you've completed all the necessary fields and it will submit. You are able to edit your application up until April 2nd at noon. So even if you submit, March 29th and you realize, oh, I want to go in and revise an answer, you have the ability to go back into your application and make adjustments, and it will save automatically. One of the things I did not show, but is important to know, is that Zoom grants will save automatically. So let me go back to the applications question. Sorry, my mouse is being a little, it's mirroring. So if I was to type something in this field, all I have to do is click outside of the field and you see it saves automatically. So your application will save as you move through the process. And then once you get back into it, it will all be saved. So you can have multiple people working on the application at the same time. I would just be careful. It will just take whatever, I wouldn't have them working in the same section at the same time. So that is, then you can go back to view open programs. See that. So that is a quick review of Zoom grants. For those who have used this before, it should look very familiar. For those who are new, hopefully it's fairly intuitive. But if you do have questions, if you get stuck, if you are unclear of something, please reach out to Nicole Boyes or myself, and we will try to help answer any questions you have. We are not Zoom grants experts. If we get really stuck, Zoom grants does have a technical assistance desk that you can also reach out to help if you're having technical difficulties with Zoom grants. So with that, so we have done a lot of talking. You've done a lot of listening. So let's get to your questions. So hopefully that all makes sense. It seems manageable, reasonable, doable. So Nicole, I know folks have been putting things in the chat. Let's kind of start with questions in the chat that are still outstanding and work through those questions. So I'm wondering if you can help kind of.
There actually weren't many. I think there was really only one from Dan so far about and I think Jacinda already answered it, about the who to contact for questions and deadlines for submitting questions.
I also sent one directly to Tom. I didn't put it
Oh.
in the common one.
Okay.
That was Trudy, sorry, Trudy.
Looks like Gabe has a question as well in the chat.
Yeah, okay. So Gabe's question is, if applying for a 2-year grant, did you say we should put in a budget info and a request amount for 1 year? Yes, so your budget, your request is a 1-year budget is what you're submitting your application for. What we will do is then, if funding is available, provide that 2nd year of funding at that same level or portion of that, but you're putting in a 1-year budget for your request. Good question.
Do you want to do Trudy's question? There's a question from Shelley. Okay.
Yeah, so Trudy's question is around kind of racial equity, improving racial equity to organizations. And that's actually a good question, Trudy, and something I wanted to touch on in the scoring criteria. So let me see if I can get back to the scoring criteria. So you will see this scoring criteria is very similar to what has been used in past years. The biggest change that the RHC made this year, and this was based on feedback that they heard from the Housing Action Team, was increasing emphasis on addressing and reducing racial disparities. So this item of supporting vulnerable and historically disadvantaged populations is now worth 20 points in the application process. In past years, that was worth 5 points. So it's really an indication of the importance that the RHC is placing on this topic. It's not intended to punish organizations, but really to kind of say, this is important for us. We want you to pay attention to it. And if organizations, one of the questions in the application is, what is your organization doing to address racial equity? So if your organization is part of implementing your project, there are tasks that your organization wants to do to support reducing racial disparities and equity. We encourage you to include that in your application. We do not pretend that we have this all figured out, but we want to make sure that it is emphasized as an area of importance. One of the set-asides that the RHC did do this year is putting aside a portion of money to hire a diversity, equity, inclusion consultant or to work on that process. So we will be looking to possibly hire consultants to help the homeless crisis response system and the county work on this. So in line with that, if there's things you want to include in your budget to support your organization's development related to supporting your project, I think it needs to be tied to kind of how it's going to improve outcomes in your project. We would encourage you to include that in your application. Does that answer your question, Trudy?
Yes, thank you very much. That's what I wanted to know.
Hey, Tom, can I chime in on that?
Yes.
So everything Tom just said mostly pertains to the housing system and a little bit to TST, but I would sort of modify a bit. So the scoring criteria, the points for TST are different, and as he said before, are laid out in the TST RFP itself. We also increased the points on issues of equity and inclusion, but it's not quite as many points as it is on the housing side. That's not because we don't think it's important. It's because I would say there's so much variability in the program models that are being proposed to TST that we put a little bit more emphasis on what's the program model, what are the evidence-based practices, what's the importance to the community, the variability of program models on the housing side is a little bit less. So I think I needed more points to give to program models. It's not because we didn't value racial equity. And I guess one more thing while I have the floor. So in the chat, someone said, is there a limit on the number of applications? And Nicole answered that for the housing project. So for TST, we've asked for no more than 2 applications per agency. We only are awarding $250,000, proposals between $30,000 and $100,000. So it's likely we will give about 3 awards, and I'd say it's somewhat unlikely that the commissioners would choose to give more than 1 award to the same organization, but anything is possible.
So Tom, what
Carrie?
I said really quick to that question, so they're asking about the limited number of applications, and I had said, no, not for the housing. Has there ever been a limit for how many applications for the Human Services Fund?
No. So you can submit as many applications as you'd like. And the expectation is there'll be multiple awards for the Human Services Funds. For that $272,000, the intent is not for that to go to one agency, but to go to multiple agencies. I think last year, I want to say 7 or 8 agencies received awards. So I would expect something similar this year. So there's no intent for that funding to go to just one agency.
What about, do you know veterans? Do you know?
Veterans has been, it's $75,000, so it's not a large pot of money. That has been 1, sometimes 2 awards. So usually they're looking to make 1 or 2 awards with that source of money. So so I guess at this point, I think we've covered the questions in the chat. If folks have
we do have
questions.
one.
Oh, go ahead, Jacinda.
Sorry, we do have a question from Dan. And Dan, I'm not sure. So you have a CIP in here, and I'm not sure if you're referring to what is now the Human Services Fund or what that's referring to. But this is one that Tom might require you to weigh in.
I just meant capital improvement programs.
Got it. Thank you. Around property counting as outside funding and leveraging.
All right.
Tom, can you see what I wrote, or do you want me to read it?
Yeah, I can see it. Documented donation or bargain sale of property counts as outside funding toward leverage. Yeah, I think that would count. I think we're looking broadly. I think we have a broad definition of leverage. So if you're receiving land or something at a discount, I think that would be considered leverage.
For example, in a project that we're doing now, we have roughly $100,000 discounted sale and a $50,000 cash donation and no governmental funding. So we have to count what we have.
Yeah.
Dan, I would encourage you in that budget, the budget tab, there's a budget narrative. That might also be a good place to, you know, if any further explanation is needed.
So moving on, Judy, I see a question about the food bank applying for CDBG public service. That is kind of one eligible spot for the food bank in terms of supporting residents in Tumwater. You're correct, approximately $150,000 of the CDBG would be eligible for public service funds. That's, we're looking at 15% of around $1 million. It would also, you know, food bank activities would also be eligible under the Human Services Fund pot of money as well.
Another question about the Human Services Fund is clarifying if they need to address all 4 basic needs or if just one or two. And I
No.
was just about to type that answer in if you want to just.
No, you don't need to address all four, just at least one. And so that's where we're looking on any combination of those categories, but at least one of those categories. So if you want to just focus on food, that's fine, or just on emergency needs, but those are the eligible categories.
And then another one are tiny homes eligible as a capital improvement?
So it depends on the nature of the tiny home project. So in and of themselves, tiny homes are eligible as a capital improvement. They are not would not be a service activity, although the services to support a tiny home project would fall under services. For the federal home dollars, our funds are intended to be used for permanent housing. So there needs to be a lease. So if those funds those tiny homes are built and operated as permanent housing, they would be eligible. If you're looking at them as temporary housing, then they would probably not be, they would not be eligible for a capital improvement project under the home money. We could look, possibly that could be eligible under Cdbg and Tumwater. We might be able to look at some of our 2060 funds for that. I'm kind of looking at Jacinda. It really depends on the nature of the intent of the project, not just necessarily the tiny homes, but is that permanent housing? Is it intended to be a shelter? What's the intent behind the use of those tiny homes? Would determine that. So for Susie's question around Cdbg, cycling back to Yelm. So this is the last year that the county has a memorandum of understanding with Lacey, Tumwater, and the South County cities. And so there's a 3-year rotation. This is the last year of our agreement. And so we will be renegotiating that MOU kind of this year. My expectation, if the process continues as it has in the past, that next year would be for unincorporated county in the South County cities, which would include Yelm. So my expectation is next year, 2022, would be a year for Yelm. But I can't say that officially until we actually finalize that MOU with the jurisdictions. But that's would be the intent if we follow the pattern for the last 6 years. Looking at Dan's question on how to count the number of units for cooperative living. And so looking at a 5-bedroom unit, I'm looking at Jacinda, I'm trying to remember, I know we dealt with this in the past, but I not remember exactly how we dealt with it. Do you recall?
I don't recall, only to say, the unit counts with a 2 or more bedroom would receive 1.25 units points in the scoring process, whereas a 1-bedroom would be just that 1 point. So we would look at in the RFI application, it asks to break down the number of units and bedroom size. So we would split the singles and the 2+ bedroom sizes and do that math there. I don't recall during last year's 2020's RFI if there was further discussion that maybe I don't recall or missed around ownership of units.
Yeah, and so Dan, we'll get back to you with a more clear answer on that. What it may be is around leases. It depends on how many leases you have in that unit. And so we'll count each lease kind of separately. So if you have, people under 3 separate leases, 3 households living under separate leases, then that may be 3 units if it's a total of 5 bedrooms. So, but let Jacinda and I kind of go back and revisit that, and we'll follow up with more clarification. Yeah, and it gets, some of your situations get a little more complicated. And I appreciate that. Other questions, feel free to type them in the chat, or if people want to unmute themselves and ask out loud, feel free to do that. We can open up and have a discussion, so don't feel limited to the chat. I appreciate kind of doing that during our presentation, having that discussion, but if folks want to unmute themselves and ask questions, feel free to do that as well. Want to make sure we're answering any questions you have to the best of our ability. Anything in the chat we haven't answered that people asked that they didn't feel was answered?
No, hi, good afternoon. Gail Hemmon with Community Youth Services, and this has been very clear and helpful. I don't have a single question. Thank you.
Great, thank you. No, I think for those folks who have done this the last couple of years, hopefully our process continues to improve and make sense. I've been pretty happy with Zoom grants the last couple of years. I think it's helped our processes. It's a little 2000 technology, but I think it's reliable, it's straightforward, with a lot of bells and whistles. But just a review, kind of again, of the review process for the housing related RFP. So this will go to a review team made up of experts of, depending on the pot of money you're applying for. So there are staff under the Regional Housing Council technical team. So there'll be staff from Lacey, Olympia, Tumwater, Thurston County, and TRPC, Regional Planning Council, who are reviewing and scoring the applications. And they'll be passing on those recommendations and scores to the RHC, the elected body. Those elected officials will review those scores, make a recommendation, and then kind of the recommendation from the Regional Housing Council will ultimately go to the Board of County Commissioners to approve those contracts. Contracts will start, some contracts will start July 1st, others will start September 1st based on the funding source. Federal contracts for home and Cdbg will start sometime after September 30th, usually when we receive our official grant agreement from HUD for those funds. So that's the timing for those awards.
I have one additional question, if I may.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, so does the HC, does the Human Services Fund Basic Needs, does it follow the same guidelines as the minimum and the max as far as, is it 30,000 minimum in a request for an RFP?
No, so for the HSF funds, we have not set a minimum or maximum for those funds.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. The multi-year funding provisions, does that, so it looks like all capital improvement projects remain 1 year in their framework.
That is correct. So the 2-year funding does not apply to capital projects. So capital projects it's a one-time 1-year funding award, even though those capital projects may take more than a year to complete. We know capital projects sometimes are 2-3-year projects, but it's not a service activity that you're continuing year after year. So capital projects are a one-time 1-year award.
Thank you.
I will say, to clarify, for the housing basic needs, the last several years, we have made those 1-year awards and not made those 2-year awards. This year, the housing basic needs awards will be kind of moving to that 2-year cycle. So 1-year award with an expectation for a continuation the second year. The Human Services Fund continues to be a 1-year award, and that will be renewed next year. So 1-year award only for the Human Services Fund. So that is a year-to-year allocation of funding. We tried to spell that out. There's a little table in the Affordable Housing and Homeless Services RFP that tries to spell out what's 1 year of funding and what's 2 year of funding. So hopefully that clarifies things, because I know it can be a little confusing. Any other questions? All right. Well, if you do have questions, especially if you have difficulties with Zoom grants, please reach out to Nicole or myself. If you have questions about any of the resources, we will try to provide as much guidance as we can. We certainly obviously can't provide technical assistance or advice on what to include in your application or what not to include in your application. But if we can help kind of troubleshoot some technical issues around submitting your application, we're happy to do so. As I said at the beginning, we will post a link to this our website, so you can go back and review it if that is helpful, or share it with other staff who are not able to attend. If questions do come in that we think are broadly applicable, we will post those as an FAQ, so they are broadly available. We'll try to send those out also via email. If we think there's something that we missed covering that would be broadly applicable to applicants, we'll try to make sure everyone has the same information about any questions that other applicants may have, so no one has an unfair advantage. All right, last call. Oh, sorry, I see. All right, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your time today. And look forward to seeing lots of good, exciting applications.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.